pleased to welcome to our Critical Conversations seminar and series of talks Antoni Muntadas, who is our 12th speaker this term. And as we progress through this term, things have only gotten better, as clearly represented with Antoni's presence here. I've known Antoni since the 1990s. Not only, I'm going to read the biographical information, which I think is very important and crucial, but I just wanted to say that not only is Antoni, I think, clearly one of the most important and instrumental provocative artists working in media over the past few decades, without question, but also I think one of the most significant artists committed to education in different ways. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We, I think, sort of got to know each other better in a more complex, layered way within the context of the Insight 2005 project, even though we had worked together and known each other beginning, as I said, in the 1990s. While Antoni will not necessarily discuss that or show that project today, it was amazing to see him actually working on that project, researching and working with individuals. And he'll talk a little bit about his working process today, but it was quite inspirational. And also, I have to say that I think his working method and methodology has been, in some level, profoundly consistent over the past few decades in terms of sort of rethinking what it means to engage in a sort of, in terms of media, a certain kind of critique, if you will, of documentary practice, even the notion of the interview, and engaging in the question of power as it manifests itself through media and through other structures has been extremely important on various levels of the art world. But I do want to read a more prepared bio. Antoni's work addresses social, political, and communications issues, the relationship between public and private space within social frameworks, and investigations of channels of information and the ways they may be used to censor central informations or promulgate ideas. Antoni works in a variety of media, such as photography, video, publications, internet, and multimedia installations. He studied at the Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingenieros Industriales in Barcelona, and the Pratt Graphic Center in New York. He has taught and directed seminars at the University of California, San Diego, the École des Beaux-Arts in Bordeaux and Grenoble, the CAVS, the CAVS at the MIT, where he has a professorship at MIT, San Francisco Art Institute, the École Nationale des Beaux-Arts in Paris, the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, Cooper Union in New York, and many other institutions. Muntadas has received several prizes and grants, including those of the Guggenheim Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the NEA, NISCA, Arts Electronica in Linz, Austria, and the Premier National des Arts Plastiques du Generalitat de Catalunya, which was most recently, right? That was, when was the Catalunya Prize?
It's another one.
One, yeah. He has created works commissioned for the Centre National des Arts Plastiques in Paris, the Fond d'Art Public in Marseille, the Public Art Fund in New York, and has been resident artist and consulting advisor in several research and education centers, including the Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester, the Banff Center in Canada, Arte Lecu in San Sebastian, Spain, and the University of Western Sydney in Australia, to name a few. Antoni's works have been exhibited throughout the world, including Venice Biennale, Documenta 6 and 10 in Kassel, Germany, the Sao Paulo Biennale, La Biennale de Leon in La Habana, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Berkeley Art Museum in California, the Wexner Art Center in Columbus, Ohio, CAPC in Bordeaux, France, to name just a few. He was born in Barcelona, Spain in 1942 and has lived and worked in New York since 1971. So it's my pleasure to have Muntadas here with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. What Joshua mentioned, the the seminar you have, I think it's in a way very similar where I'm teaching in Boston, in MIT. It's two courses. One is a seminar on issues of public art, and I prefer call urban space, but fine. And also another than is dialogues, artists and architects. Like that, for both, especially the first one, is people they come from different disciplines. Artists, people in the media, they are part of the media lab there, or there are people in urban studies or architecture, and some people also from other universities in Boston, because Boston, especially Cambridge, is a school town. People from Museum School, Harvard, that normally is a group of 15 people that are very, very, with different backgrounds and different interests. And what I get from Joshua, and it's a similar situation, I think, here, like that, I decided the presentation is, the presentation that normally I do when I do the first day of class in MIT. And it's about the city. And I put on translation because since '95 I've been investigating issues of the translation, not from language to language, but translation as a cultural interpretation, a cultural transcription. I think moving from culture to cultures, I think issues are understanding and interpreted in a different way. But that I consider that this presentation is part of that, because I think the fact that a lot of things I got to say, then probably I present an aspect, and it's maybe other aspects that could be maybe complete or could be part of that issues. Please, if you feel I consider in that situation pretty informal, then if you have a question, interrupt me. I think I always feel when I bring people on my class, MIT, I say, people, you should take the juice, you know, when the people come, because questions is acts of generosity. It's an act of find the possibility that I change my speech and go to other things that maybe are more hidden or left over and make me think, or maybe complete situation than if without question maybe I go in my track. Okay, on translation, the city start with a very simple structure of what I feel. The question will be, in the city, artists, architects, city planners, designers, what is the response historically to the city? And if I take the artists, I think what they characterize the artists in intervention in the public space is the idea of the monument. The monument as an element that especially in European, some American cities, some Latin American cities, is part of the landscape, part of the identity of the cities, reference to history, reference to anthropological situation. And this image for me is important because it's the last statue of Franco in Spain. It's the only one exists. It was many during the Franco period, but this is the only one in the hometown. Francisco Franco was a dictator in Spain for 40 years. I think it represents the monument, the historical monument, the generic. The general in the horse, the pedestal, the sense of authority, and I think represent other monuments in other parts. This is in Lille, in France, in Finland. I think that they become a kind of a generic image or representation of the city. And also it could be a poet or maybe a politician. But what I want to remark here is the idea of the pedestal. The pedestal as an element that I think in the history of the monuments in the city is an important act of imposition, and the fact that you needed to look up, and in a way is a characteristic in that kind of representation. I think the pedestal and the idea of these works that are permanent are an important reference to understand what the situations may be now. I say that some of this, it could be very anecdotal, but still the pedestal is still there. And I insist about the pedestal because then we move to the what I call anti-monument, and I think it starts with the Rodin, the Bourgeois Le Calais, where the monuments start to disappear. They put the level of the people and of the viewer. It's not this imposition already to see up, but try to connect in a much more direct way. I think that open up, I think this is an introduction after I will talk about my work, but I feel I like it to give this kind of axis. I think the anti-monument includes this freestyle sculpture of the 50s, 60s, 70s, that in the first one it was very institutional, connected to who was making the commissions. It was the cities, the government, etc. This is more a corporate structures. I think it's freestyle, no pedestal, and it's all the repertoire of the pop minimalism in public space. And this is an MIT, a Calder, Richard Serra. I mean, I don't want to discuss the quality of the work. I think I wanted to discuss what it represents about these signs of artists in a public space. It moves from authoritarian to ludic to ironical. We know, this is the kind of the cities. I think I was in Seoul, you see an Oldenburg, you go to Chicago, you see an Oldenburg, you go to, in a way that feeling is that both anti-monument and monument, they are permanent to stay there, and it's a certain kind of imposition on the public space, where the citizen, they don't have much to say, and it depends on the countries, are more part of a discussion with a community. But in general, in many countries, if it's money, it's an artist, and it's a client, the sculpture is there. And I think sometimes for good. And I think this, what I think is changed, and I think very much, and this is a word that I start to use in the mid-80s, early 80s, as a kind of alternative to the idea of monument, anti-monument, of science and public space, about a series of actions or signs or gestures that happen in a kind of temporary way, where it's not permanent, and where the repertoire open to a many kind of devices to represent issues of interrogation, critical issues, and I will say perception issues. Well, Dan Graham worked for the Munster. It was a work for this event. It happened in Munster every, I think, 5 or 6 years. And it was one of the pavilions. He issues, well, you probably know the work. I mean, it's not trying to do an art history class, but to see that his pavilions coming from the dispositive of the pavilions are elements that integrated very much through the idea of mirrors, transparency, reflection, etc. I think him because those works are temporary, stay for a period of time and disappear. And I feel like they're working very much. I use for my own work, they use works calling as artifacts to be referring to the anthropological view. An artifact is something you activated. And I think the audience needs to activate it. And a lot of these works start from the idea to be more active and less passive, and to try to interrogate it and to create a certain kind of awareness and critical issues in a public urban space. Well, some of these works, people, I go to show work, maybe they've been here in presentations, you are probably part of your own knowledge. Barbara Kruger, it has to do with the period of the 80s where issues of feminism and also the guerrilla girls. But in a way, is also to show that what it was bronze or wood and that, the material changed, the media, the billboard, and we talk about that in Los Angeles, that actually is more billboards than monuments here. That I think this is really to considering that. But you know, and I think it's now a show at about billboards, no?
Yeah.
Mark.
Yeah.
How
many billboards?
Yeah. Anyway, I think in the end of the 70s, 80s, people start to use different systems to the representation. For example, this is the works of Dennis Adams, and I think it's an interesting artist, less known maybe than others that I showed, that he's been doing a series of works, especially in the 80s, that it was the maquette and this is the work, like bus stops. I mean, places where he takes the device and where the work he become useful. Why not to increment a certain kind of the facts that these questions also it could be applied to a situation where the public furniture, it could have a kind of, could talk with issues of design. And a lot of his works and the photographs are related to historical contextual situation. This is something I think is very important, the context. I think myself specifically, I'm very interested to see, and this is what is related to the On Translation series, that every context is different and it's not the same thing to work in Los Angeles, to work in Sao Paulo, to work in Taiwan, or to work in Paris. And I think the stories and the backgrounds is different. That work it was produced as a temporary structure for a series of platforms for performance and activities during the elections in the '84. Like that.
Was that Creative Time? Art of the
Yeah,
Page?
yeah. Like that, groups of Democrats, groups asking him to do for musicians and Democrats and to do, also, I think it's related with certain kind of issues that it happened in Russia in the 20s and where art and design and application becomes part of that. And of course, this was a political manifest in terms of defining himself, of the deconstruction of the Republican icon by to use as a stage where musicians and of course this is, we know what is behind the Battery Park, the towers, and other signs, posters, stickers. I think it's part of the case of Victor Burgin, known by his photographs, but also some interventions using more like a temporary works on the shapes of posters. I think other work is less known because it's from Brazil and only Latin American practice start to be well known in United States in the last 10 years, I will say. Sildo Mireles in the late 60s and 70s, he do a series of interventions, and I think in his case the word intervention is very appropriate. I mean, I don't think when he was doing it, he know how to call. He was altering the circuits by writing the Coca-Cola bottles message anti the generals and military, and the Coca-Cola going back to the plants, refill, and message circulating. Like that, the white text is political message, and he used the old strategy of refilling and going to the plant and coming back to the consumer to, in a certain way, to circulate a message that in a certain way it could be very subtle, but it was pretty effective. I would say the other mediums, like besides the billboards, the electronic signs, in New York, the public art found, like Creative Time, it was a organization, is still on, to help artists to do intervention in public space, and to use the electronic sign for works of 60 seconds, so intervening inside of the advertising. Because I think in a way, what these screens been using is for pure commercial purpose. Other projects using projections, Christopher Disco has been very active on the idea of activate monuments. His projections are always very witty, and after a process of research of choosing the image of projection, this was in relation with the Cold War. This is in a projection in relationship with a prison in Washington, D.C. This was in the South African embassy in London before in the middle of the apartheid, and I think it was, very short intervention because, police, it was telephone calls, pam, pam, pam. Like that, these times could differ. I think an intervention could be a week, or could be 3 months, or it could be even, my feeling is when you're working in a project like that, the important is to know when it's going to be finished. Maybe 5 years it could be an intervention, because for the cost, the implementation in the city, it will be maybe very frivolity to keep it just for 1 week when it's been a lot of cost and expenses entire. This is closer in San Diego, and I think it was obviously his projection in terms of places where has to do with religion and issues of the colonization and wealth. And another issue that I think it was important in the idea of the interventions is, and I mentioned before, context. This work of Felix Gonzalez Torres was important because it was not only about issues in the 80s in relationship with the AIDS and the commission in this case, it was for Christopher Street. That is a community with a gay community. Like that, in a way, it was very, very site-specific work related to data and information of a series of people that was linked to the AIDS coalition, and with no chronological order, people from Oscar Wilde to the Stonewall Rebellion. Then it was related to the AIDS issue. And I think this is a photographer that is from Los Angeles, and I don't know if people know, but the thing is, I always feel like Robert Henneken. Sometimes is from the photographer from another kind of generation, but he was very interested to, when I start to intervene in the cosmopolitan magazine and start to silkscreen image in the magazine, the very conventional magazine, and distribute again to the newsstand, altering, a little bit like Sildo Meireles with the bottles of Coca-Cola, but with issues that I think with a very specific magazine that I think in a way represent issues of the, I mean, Cosmopolitan as a very conventional magazine. Okay, maybe after the intervention is another line it could be open, and I think it's a line I like a lot, but it's not I think always the class on artists and architecture in MIT, I start always saying that it's a list of failures. It's the possible collaboration between artists and architects. I think when we talk about collaboration, it's always a word very complicated. But when we talk about artists and architects, I think it's always this idea that artists calling architects to solve some problems, or architects asking artists to decor, or to create a certain kind of ornament, of creating a kind like that. Well, it will be interesting is when the collaboration starts from zero. Very rare situations. I think it's very important to revise that periods to periods because, and I think it's a moment of revision now. It's a lot of young architects and a lot of artists that are interested. And not only, also sociologists, city planners, the idea of interdisciplinarity as a kind of intervene in the city in a larger project than just to do a sign or a gesture, to maybe could be involved in a territory or in a project, then it could be. So that this is something that I feel it's a surprise that not really happening more. I mean, you have cases a little bit. In New York, you have this project with the Aconchi Steaming Hall. The storefront for art and architecture is a building interesting because both the collaboration of both kind of their signs of identity disappear, and I think in a collaboration, I think is what it should be. Is like you don't need to recognize the work by authorship because it's a hybrid created, and that hybrid maybe lose the signs of identity and becomes another thing. This is a project in North Spain, San Sebastian, and I show because I think it was an interesting project between architect Peña Ganchegui and a sculptor, actually conventional sculpture of the 60s, Eduardo Chillida, good sculpture, but they decide to work together a part of the coast to create a square, and where remodeled the space, but also to add some elements that has to do with the landscape. The final element is like to introduce these elements where the waves, the water go there, and it created like organ, a sound, and it created music. You're working with a musician, and it's a very successful project where a musician, an architect, and a sculptor was working. It's very, I mean, something that the people embrace. And I think that is what I think is important, is when in a public work, is with a community or the city embrace the project, appropriate the project, and in a way feel like it's their own. Okay, now I make a break. This I wanted to just bring it some kind of what I said before, axis for this idea of monument, anti-monument, intervention, and possible works of artists and architects working in the public space, extended to other, as I say, as an interdisciplinary project. I start to talk about some of my works. I use the word project as a, and also I start to use at the end of the 70s as a, develop a certain methodology of how develop the work. I feel like I am for initiated projects where the project initiated a process. And in a way, it's a series of questions. I think that is also I propose to in the class in MIT to one, they asked me, I propose a project to answer these questions. Who, what, why, how, where, when, for who. And I think each one for me represents a step, and it's decisions that I think created a process that sometimes, in my case, take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, some projects 10 years, or keeping going. And I think it could be at another, on how much? Because I think also this is something that implies the economy and the who is paying, also the plus value of the work, etc., etc. I mean, starting from the idea of project, I got to talk about some projects I've been doing in the last years. Some in all related to public space. One's present in the public space of the street, on the media. For me, the public, what he defined the public space is the street, in large, internet, and television. I think the three are elements where the public works that could be presented as it has the characteristics to be public. The stadium, it was a proposition I started in '89. It was originated in Banff in Canada. It's an interesting place to work because they give you a series of time to develop the project there. I think the idea of the stadium tried to relate it to the city in a way to, in cities there are 200,000 inhabitants, immediately you have a museum and you have a stadium. You have an element of high art and an element of popular culture. And the stadium, coming from the Greeks and Romans, I think it don't change much. I think it's a structure from architectural point of view that is this container to accommodate the spectacle and in certain way manipulate it. The project, it was a large scale construction to analyze the phenomena of the stadium from the perspective of symbols, architecture, furniture, audience, and it's hard to describe. I will say it's a large scale maquette. Maquette is to look scale or transit or to define certain decision. I think in this case is to define the spectacle of the stadium. He used sound, he used projections, and in every place is presented. I think the last is the 14, it was in Dortmund, and I'm preparing the 15 for Sao Paulo. He changed the software adequate to the context is presented. When it was presented in Berlin in '91, it was emphasized very much of the Olympics of '30s, where the ultimate use of a stadium by Hitler with probably you know some of the film of Riefenstahl and the use of the masses as a kind of manipulation situation. The structure, it has an elliptical construction with sand and a projection in the of a capture audience, circulated moving, that the audience see through the columns. They don't go. It's a lot of projection, for projection, where the image and text are, and the soundtrack, is recording for different stadiums in different historical parts of the moment. From rock concert to political speeches to the all religious, because the stadium people associate some for sports, but I think it's a container for mass events. I think it's really like the ultimate space for political or for religious or for sports and music, etc. In a way, it's a place for winners and losers and competition. One thing I want to say is that sometimes the works, the projects are different elements. In this case, it was the installation, but when it was in Berlin, it was also a newspaper. Then it was inserted in the local Tagesspiegel with a Sunday. This insertion of newspaper extended the project, not in terms of publicity, but because the contents, it was a stadium from the perspective of sociologists or for architects or for communication people, that it gives the 16 pages recontextualize what after people could maybe see or not see in the space. Okay, following the idea of the museum and the city as a spectacle, I start to originate it, and I will see in other works later, the city as a spectacle. City Museum start to create a kind of series of works where the place of presentation is like a kind of peep show, where the substitution of what supposed to be pornography by architecture, or the viewers to architecture, and where it's always they become background in relationship with issues also to tourism. Like that, industry of culture, industry of tourism equal industry of a spectacle. The image that are made in the place where it's presented, and normally cities that it has an historical Bruges in Belgium, Paris, but then it starts to move to other cities, Barcelona. And what I did in New York, I put a question mark, because I am not sure if New York it was a city museum. I feel like I start to see it a city, a film city. I start to research, and I see that every week in New York it has 400 movies are being shooting there. Like that, of course, from NYU and Columbia students to commercial, indies production, all kind. But it's a city with the reproduction, and it's interesting because sometimes in other countries you start to talk about New York, people they don't know New York, but they know by the films. Like that, it's very much a city where the representation of through films is pretty defined. Going back to the use of the Times Square, this is not an advertisement. I think it was a commentary on the context where it was presented. This project, that it was 85, I think it will be better to show it in video because the sound. Thank you. So fragile. Thank you. In the same context of the city of New York in '89, some years after, I decided to do a project that I call, it's not site-specific, city-specific. I think this project, it will not have any meaning outside of the city of New York. A transformation of a limousine as a kind of bulletin board or billboard moving with projections in the window. Considering the limousine is a kind of mysterious element because the dark glasses, you never know what is going on there. It's always this kind of moving. In a way, it's a representation of a status quo, especially in New York, that I think it was very, it was basically moving around United Nations to Wall Street and Broadway, and I think it was for a month and a half, slowly moving around in December '89. The projections, it was image coming from the media and with text on top. I call sometimes this as a kind of acupuncture, where the text inscribed in the image, it define certain issues that I think maybe could be less ambiguous. Part of the project, I mean, I think it would be better also to see it in the project. It was originated at the new museum in Broadway, and in the new museum you have like a rental place for rental limousines, and you have a brochure and you know what is going on, and then the car was moving through. If I recall well, I think you wrote about this for our magazine, our forum, or yeah, I think.
Who's driving? Are you driving?
I drive in the beginning, and then a student from the Winday program, like that, we start to, you know, to their turns. I do the first days, and when I see everything, it was moving on. It was in December on '89. That it was a moment where shopping and a very specific period in New York. They asked me to do in other places. I always refuse. In Rotterdam, I think. I think it was, you know, in New York, the limousines are so current. I think is there, no? That is injected in the urban situation. This is a project in Rotterdam. I think it was a project and 1 year of, well, 2 years of preparing and 1 year of presentation. Every month, this billboard, it was changing their meaning. The photograph, it was a structure of a photograph of audience, what I call filter, and a medium of representation. Like that, this element, it was moving in the street, but also in certain moment go to the institution and has another life on the net, and change 12 of these instruments and accommodate in different institutions in Rotterdam. Rotterdam is a heavy network of institutions, cultural and not, Museum of the Maritime Museum, the Museum of the War, Museum of History, but I decided to do 12 of these billboards, moving billboards, addressing to issues of the audience. That when people see, it was presented not as a work, it was presented as an element in the lobbies where people could confront and start to see well, this I saw in another place. I start to be, and I start to make a kind of, again, acupuncture in the city of Rotterdam. In Puerto Rico, in more recent, the station, they start a project because the traffic in Puerto Rico is very, I mean, all based on cars, like any American city. They don't have a really a strong public transportation. They created this beginning in 2005 a new train. The station, it was commissioned to some people, to artists and architects, to do interventions there. Mostly was projects permanent. I negotiate to be for 10 years. I feel like, because it's my attitude that not to leave things for in a permanent way. And in 10 years, in the 15, this project will be out. I use the displays of advertising to negotiate with them that they will not be advertising in the station. And I provide a series of photographs of native, well, actually not native, a photographer that died in Puerto Rico, but he was original from Ukraine. He was part of the FAR administration group where many of the photographers at that period, they was exploring part of the cities in the United States, and he arrived to Puerto Rico and he stayed in '46. I found that the work was unknown, and I tried to create a kind of homage to him. I think the works also, it was in '46, he was making photographs of the train between San Juan and Ponce. It was the issues of the station, and these photographs are part of the Library of Congress, public domain. And I enlarged and presented in this space at the, I think it was 8 light boxes, and complement with larger light boxes of photographs of him 40 years later, where his work started to be, from the beginning, very, I will say, personal. It started to be much more critical of the city, about issues of consumerism and transportation, and I think it was interesting that somebody, when arrived, he becomes very sensitive and very intimidated by the place, and after 40 years I start to talk in another way and I start to have another voice. In a way, we made 100,000 newspapers that they was opening for the people take this train. They also read it, part of his text, another. It was to try to put in context the work of him as a, for me it was a kind of, it's part of the On Translation series, to say that, to appropriate the voice of somebody that knows better the country, than, and this is happened a lot when we are going from places to places, and in short period of time, even in my case, normally I get involved for a long time, to try to react to the situation. And I feel in this case, it was more important for me to use the image, and this image talking in, as a translation gesture.
Can I ask a quick question about
Sure.
this? The public, you said that the earlier images were in the public domain in the Library
Both.
of Congress?
Both.
All the images?
Yeah, yeah. Let me see that. This is, no, what I want to say is these photographs are very much created with the viewer, a kind of very personal, intimate relationship. And the work evolved, becomes more critical. This is the reason I use it. And both they are public domain. But I think that's, in this context, I think it's interesting maybe to say that I approach to the family. The son is photographer. He teaches in Connecticut, in Hartford. I make an appointment with him. And I arrived there and I was saying, oh, maybe, you know, this guy. No, he has my catalogs and that. He said, well, I understand perfectly the project, that it was not necessary, it's public domain, I could use it. But then it was a project well paid. I decided to donate a certain part of the fee to the archive to recovering some of his photographs. And now it's really an archive. It was a totally disaster, the archive. And now becomes a place where, you know, people could study. I mean, Jack Delano, the name of him. If people are interested, I think the work is a very interesting photographer. And arriving from Ukraine, stay in New York and go to Puerto Rico and live. And start to create magazines, films, really created an active situation in an island that actually they recognized more or less.
Is he still alive or no?
No. Okay, that's another series that I started in '81, and it has three series. One in Washington, D.C., the first one, and the same device or the same way of methodology was applied to other two cities. It started from an invitation for alternative space in Washington. At that time, Washington Project for the Arts. Like many alternative spaces, they are not existing. I was surprised to hear that Lace is still on here, and I think it's fantastic, you know. At that time it was Leica, I mean, many in Los Angeles, but I think it's great that it exists. Like that, when I confront Washington, a city that no relatively as a capital, I feel like it was a place where important for everybody. It's like I feel like it's an history, a book of history for most of the Americans, and in a way to see the monuments and to see a lot of the, not only the museum, the city itself is really kind of city museum. And I start to see which other monuments are created, not necessarily physically, but by the media. And I start to research and find photographs, like this black and white photograph. This is the assassination of Letelier, Orlando Letelier, a political Chilean leader, exiled in Washington. And he was assassinated by DINA, the Chilean KGB or CIA. My interest started to recopilate all these photographs, and I start to go to the same places and photograph and see how the transformation of the place, then talking about time, forgetfulness, silence. Same thing with Pennsylvania Avenue, manifestations in the 60s, rush hour, things are continuing. Or, you know, this was a series of 14. The manifestation of Indian American in Washington in front of the White House, and the substitution by the tourists. After some years, I think this was 81, 18 years after, or 17. It was not that I have this feeling for every city. I found in Budapest that it was a situation that I found it's not similar, but I feel like I see the city for different reasons, especially political, and the transition of the communist period to the post-communist, that the spaces also, starting always from the media, created this media monument that created noise in the moment it's happening, the photograph, and it goes to a second situation where it's silence, forgetfulness, and bring another kind of relationship to the city. For example, this, it was clearly the photograph on top, it was the red star, symbol of the communist period, and after 89, it's substitution by this stupid flower that, you know, like that, in a way, how icons and imagery are changing in relationship with how history changed too. The last project of that series is in Argentina, very recent, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Argentina, I need to say that for me, it's two cities in two countries where public memory are very kind of sensitive, Germany and Argentina. I think there are two countries where I feel in Europe, Germany are very involved on knowing their own past and to really are sensitive to that. And in Argentina and Latin America, I don't think ni Brazil, ni Chile, ni Colombia, and I don't think in Europe, France or Spain or Portugal are dealing the same way the Germany and Argentina. Like that, for me to do this project in Argentina, it was very careful because it's very difficult. You don't go to Argentina, you have a project of public memory, a new book. That I was, from the three, the one it was taking more time to deliver the project and take it, the research to a certain level than I think it was for me bringing something. I decided when I was presented that to showing as a full notes the Washington and Budapest to see that I was not starting with Argentina, especially I'm not original from there, even it's a country where I've been many times. And see as a reference and also for the first time showing the process. I think it was for me important to share the process of the research with the amount of photographs and of the research that it was implying for the project. Obviously the project, it was the 20 image. It was not necessary to show, but I feel it was important for myself to share this process. The 20 images are coming from different perspectives of the political situations. Perón and Isabelita saying goodbye to a military in his house. It was pretty strong to go to the house and confronting this emptiness, having the photograph in the hand. It was really a sense of this is the Instituto di Tela, that it was an important movement of artists in the 60s in Buenos Aires. This was an exhibition, one of the last exhibitions. Di Tela was a moment in Argentina where it linked with the avant-garde in other parts of the world. And now substitution in Florida Street by a leather shop with a tourist situation.
Antonio, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, please. I mean, I say that.
I know.
No.
I tend to ask permission to ask a question, which is, I don't know what that has to do with, but a slave to something. But I'm wondering, maybe it occurs to me, and I think that probably in at least one of the texts that you had given us, I'm not sure which one, maybe the question of maybe even just talking about analyzing the formal conditions within these particular elements of this work, that what seems possibly to be crucial here, and this would not be an original statement, but what happens in between these so-called images, right? I mean and there's a space that's left there, I assume, for something to happen, or for the work that happens in between, or the work that we can put into sort of constructing possible interrelationships.
I think the work starts from the black and white photograph. the document. And this is what I think is originated and the relationship with the present. I think the fact that I leave an empty space is because the between. A lot of things that are maybe I don't know, or maybe the viewer he couldn't know, and it's a kind of transition between maybe 60s to 2009, and a lot of things that could be adding there. In this case, it was the celebration of the goal of the Argentinian team for the World Cup. And of course, you go on the stadium is the same, but of course the commercial and corporate aspect appear. You know, for an event, maybe a reference to the idea of the stadium, how sports is being used as a part of nationalistic issues. You know. All the files of political prisoners and that in the desaparecidos, and then the place is clean, nothing happened. The project is very much about silence and emptiness, because life, I mean, when the black and white photograph happened, it's a moment of noise. Is seeing the newspaper, everybody's aware, this is a photograph, celebration, and then is totally forgotten and created another situation of everything it becomes clean, order, and people forget and leave the space empty. I think it could be discussed many ways, especially because I don't show every series. Normally has 14 photographs. In this case, Argentina, it was more difficult to go narrow down to less than 20. But it was trying to cover a spectrum. Another Latin American country in Sao Paulo, and that it was a project that it happened 3 times, Arte Cidade. It was a project that, this was 2003, where they invite artists and architects to work in the Zona Leste of Sao Paulo. They define, the organizers define an area, and we have 2 years to react. And it was people very different, from Vito Acconci and Dennis Adams, and we talked before, or people like Ren Kulas and other architects, most, I would say, inside and outside Brazil. The project, it was in my case to collaborate with Paula Santoro, a Brazilian architect, to explore the city and to install, after a long period of research, metal plates, but the same metal plates they use the municipality or the government to celebrate a new building, a new part of the city. But in this case, it's to celebrate urban disasters. It was a cases of where vandalization of the master plan by reasons of money or political reasons. I will say that in Sao Paulo, the master plan, it don't mean much. It could be, in a way, it will be like a little bit like, I will say, Mexico too. I will not say it's only a phenomenon in Latin America. It could be in many parts of the world. I think in Italy also, I think it's not very strict about the ways how. But it was, for me, interesting working Paula than to identify 11 places in the last 40 years. Then it was clear determination of spaces where it was creating expectations to the people by public works. Then it never happened. The money, it was assignated, the decision it was made, like the case, the name of the governor or the people he make and install in the place, in the real place. the plates, the 11 plates, it was, the last time I was there, it was only 8 because it's bronze and people take it and sell it. And I think in this case, as I said before, for me it's always temporary, is the real situation I left to see what happened in the organicity of the city itself. The cases, it was very different. I mean, it was, and also the people are intervening because it was part of changes of habitats for urban space. Here it was supposed to be a viaducto with they sacrificed that to create a freeway, on and on. I think in the beginning, when we present a kind of maquette, because what Artesidade has a public space where all the projects it was showing in an interior place where you could see people, the maquettes, and then people could go and see the projects in the outside. It was more like a kind of nucleus of information. We created the 11 podiums with the description of which, why every plate it was formalized and reaction to what. Also, a website, like the same thing I say about the newspaper in Berlin or the newspaper in Puerto Rico. The website, it was a kind of company, the project, to not only explaining the project, but also to extend it to other cities to encourage to put plates in their own spaces. It was starting from Sao Paulo, but they started to go to Valencia, Spain, Taiwan, etc. And it's still on the project. It was a kind of to extend it, not as to see it's a problem that only happened in Sao Paulo, but it's a problem that it maybe has to do a lot with different communities and different situations in relationship how somebody could transcribe or change or transform a master plan. Okay, that's work done. The context, it was a Congress of Architecture in '96 in Barcelona, Spain. It's I don't know if some architects here, but UIA is the conference for architects that every 4 years are presented in different parts of different cities in the world. And that it was dedicated to the present and future of our cities. The main exhibition, they asked me to do an introduction, and I decided to do a control room. Then it was a parody of the control room of the building itself. It's a large building, the CCB, the Centro de Cultura Contemporánea, where I installed 3 cameras in the roof, 3 cameras in the building. It was already some existing, I changed the direction, and 3 in the exhibition. The cameras was complementary with the, in the top of the roof, it was panning areas of the city that after the Olympics in Barcelona, it was transformed very, very strongly. I mean, Barcelona has been lately been seen as a model, urban model, and from architecture and that, but it needs to be discussed a lot. I think it's a model that I think it has a lot of things that was gained, but a lot of things it was also lost. The cameras, it was pointed out to Olympic City, to area where this building was, where the MACBA, the Museum of Modern Art, is in front. This whole area where it's a product of gentrification. And Montjuic, that is one, the 90s, 1890 was an international fair. They was panning and observing and related to this control room, that in a way it was to say, okay, in a control room it's a guardian or a police or somebody that is supervised. In here, the supervisor is the citizen. The person is attending to the exhibition, is the person is survey the city. is to encourage to say, okay, it's not, we don't leave to politicians and architects or planners the city. The citizen should be aware and more involved. Interviews with people living in these three areas, it was talking about issues that they say very different of the views of the politician, of architects, and I mean the daily life and how the city changed. It was another element that it was explosions and buildings that been disappear on the context of the city, and I think it was buildings that needs to be questioning if these demolitions they was right or not. I think it was issues of gentrification. That for me was important in a Congress of Architecture to talk about the city, the exhibition, and the building in a very specific situation where everybody was spending 1 week for discussing issues of the city itself. Related to issues of city spectacle, I linked to three cities, Lille, Graz, and Barcelona. This was 2003, 2004, and 2005, with the issues of capital of Europe. In Europe, it was created in the early 90s, political structure that nominated every year a city to be capital of Europe. It means like a lot of money for European common market, European community, for cultural perspective. And the question for me was to see in a project the promise, expectation, and result. And it was taking a track as a kind of metaphor for transportation, but transformed as a cinema, and projecting a film I produced before the events, interviewing politicians, interviewing architects, directors of museums, about what it will be these three capitals of Europe. And the project and the projections happen after it's happened, that the audience know already these expectations, they have their own opinions. I think if it was at the same time, it was confusing with the celebration, and it was totally appropriated by celebratory aspect. Anyway, the track, it was appearing in squares, and it created these projections. The only information it was is this, when it was in France, in French, or in Graz in German, this explaining what it was the interest of the project or the intentions. And in a way, it was really like a lot of things that people talk in a private situation to talk in a public situation. Most of these discussions, people are commenting and that, but hardly you could bring it to a forum where it could be debate in a public space and making more a situation of the debate. I think it's to show the videos. The track also was a symbol of, you know, in Europe with the common market, I think it's also movement for immigration, movement of cargo, displacement, and I think it was a symbol of displacement. This is the city planner for Barcelona, for example, per Jean Nouvel, the architect, the Euroville in Lille. And it was interrelation also interview taxi drivers. I feel the taxi drivers are the people they know better the cities. And they are really like giving another kind of memory to the city as a counterpoint of the official view. The subtitles he was changing depending the language of the city. Okay, this sentence I've been using in a kind of leitmotif. I think since I started the project on translation in 95, and it's been distributed in many kind of forms and interventions, different language, but also different kind, normally very cheap ways of production because it's vinyl, and then this was part of a project in Strasbourg where it was 5 of windows like that in the around a square where the sentence was reproduced with the language of the different groups, communities there, German, Turkish, Arab, Portuguese, and French. Strasbourg is a French city, but practically with a German background. In many ways, the way of how this sentence linked to the translations is about also the difficulty sometimes to a sentence like that to translate it in the right way. For example, I conceive in English, and I feel the English is where perception requiring involvement, it has the full, but in other places, for example, when it was showing in Korea, I think I have the image here, it was a difficulty to arrive, and then it was 8 interpretations of the same, and I decided to put the 8 because I feel like it was a really like a kind of, it was a heavy discussions about a sentence that, you know, how it could be the right, that is in Buenos Aires, using a lot of types of furniture or situation. Okay, the last project I got to talk, and I try to do fast, is a project for the Venice Biennale in 2005. In a way, the project is not only talk about, I will say, normally when you start a project, you have something you want to explore. I think at the moment to do a project is you dedicate an amount of time to try to understand a subject or an issue or a situation. I was teaching in Italy in the UAP, the School of Architecture, and I was invited by the curator, and actually I was working with him in the project I showed before in Witte de Witt in Rotterdam. That I have already a connection with Venice because I was in that context with access to a lot of information, and also working with somebody that, as a producer, that it was not starting from zero. I think in this case it's important this relation with the artist, or the individual producer work with the producer or the curator. And I decided to, in Venice, at the Biennale, to work on the Giardini. That is a part of the city. Actually, originally it's a public space. My interest started for the Giardini as a public space, created by Napoleon in 1850, And the city of Venice lost the public space at the moment it's transformed in Biennale. Like that, in a way, the project is about disappearance of public space, something that I really believe. I think more and more public spaces disappear. I think by reasons of for corporate issues or by surveillance. In this case, the Biennale, it has an effect of where the public space of the Giardini becomes a space like the Universal Studios or the Cinecittà, where every year a film is produced, is the Biennale, or architecture or arts. That I start to research with, and I start to see the floor plans. The history of the Biennale is fascinating, and the catalog is all explained pretty much, and it becomes a tool of, interesting tool of research. It's actually the thesis of Anna Maria Ferraris, and it's an interesting process of see how a part of a city lost the public space and become another thing, part of the tradition of what happened in England with the Crystal Palace, with the international fairs in Belgium, or in Chicago, the big events that become part of this society of a spectacle. I mean, the international fairs, it was first that it was created to giving visibility to inventions, to technology, where it was giving medals, the gold medal, the silver medal. This is part of a situation that in San Diego it was an important one, and it's still going on. This international, now in Shanghai, I think it opens this month. Anyway, the floor plans of the Giardini start to see how the transformation, the topography of the public space, and to see that it becomes a kind of a mini city with repeating all the issues that happen in a city or in a neighborhood. Is the main street, the main axis, privileged places and places that are really secondary. Also, these pavilions owned by countries in different ways, property, rental, subletting. It's all kind of the situation of, and of course, it becomes a mini structure of gentrification because more and more pavilions appear. And the last one, that's an interesting data, 1940, okay, Germany, Britain, France, use. In 42, Germany still, because it's the Nazi period, and you have the army, the navy, everything it becomes militarized and politicized. In a way, I think this image shows how much the Biennale, it could be a structure of political and economical issues, and not necessarily only cultural. As I say, then for me, it becomes like the Universal Studios or Cinecittà, in a way, but in a way, it becomes like a thematic park. It's a theme park for culture. I could say a lot of that, but I think I go briefly. It's all other aspects I found interesting for the project to research. It was to see the different facades of the different pavilions. The Italian pavilion, it has all this image, and I think it's missing the one, the Berlusconi. It's actually the same than the Mussolini. They clean up the intervention of Italo Scarpa, a very interesting architect, where he created these facades as a kind of prosthetic facade to hidden the fascist facade. And now Berlusconi is exactly the same. I think maybe
You can say the same. If they're interchangeable, right? Essentially at this point.
Well, I think Belgium, it was not only Italy. if you see pretty much every country, is issues of camouflage of what the political, because in a way this facade represents what is inside politically or what is the artist is presenting. It's a lot of issues in the, and this is the Spanish, and this is the one they offered me to intervene. And it started from a Baroque and construction in the 20s and become a bunker during Franco, and it's still a bunker. It's still pretty much the same construction. They put a little bit of grass to try to camouflage, but you know, well, this is the floor plan how it's now. Korea, Venezuela, and Japan is the last ones, not for the 2005, but in the last 10 years because economical reasons. The ones they could pay because oil or technology, etc., and it represents very much the last to come to the. At this moment, is 30 pavilions in the Giardini and 40 outside, and you see all these pavilions there. It's a kind of secondary. I mean, it's like it's in Bronx, no? It's a little bit. It has a kind of representation of the. Anyway. To finish the project, it was to dedicate the Spanish pavilion to the pavilion of translation, not only as a nationalistic or try representing the work in a kind of, I mean, trying to extend it to issues that with the curator would decide, he decides the works around, then it was works on the Syrian translation from 95 to 2005, and I concentrate the one in the middle, the Giardini. And the Giardini is based on this idea of try to demystify the nationalistic aspect and to emphasize of idea of movement, displacement, the idea of non-spaces for the works of Marc Auger, and to create a space very, very, with any kind of, I mean, very generic, where the furniture comes from different aspects. And I photographed that in San Diego on the airport, and it was recreated in another way. The chairs come from the Pompidou, no, the airport in Paris, and try to create a kind of mixed situation where the place could, in a way, explain the countries that are present by the kiosk there, where there are all the facades, explain all the facades, all the history of the place with in English and Italian, with a heavy research. And on the other side of the kiosk, the countries that are not represented. Why these people are and these people know, I think it's pretty much a socio-economical decisions and not necessarily cultural. It's the list of the United Nations eliminating the countries that are present, and it's a lot. Anyway, the elements that was also there, it was to talk about the Giardini itself from the perspective of inside, and it seems more like activated the place, as I mentioned before, as a artifact than to be used in a way to, you know, with elements that is part of issues of globalization, like people stand by, and you know, that I think is one of the first forms of globalization, is queues all around the world for different reasons, for papers, for immigration, for tickets, for tourism, etc. And I think it's well, I think with that I will go to finish. Well, this is the last project, maybe. If it's any question, and then I talk about this project. Sorry if I have been long.
No, please talk. I just had one question about the Spanish pavilion. I mean, in terms of the Biennale.
Yeah.
Because your practice obviously very much, as you're talking about tonight, deals with questions of representation, right, in many different ways. But within the context of the Biennale, can you talk about your representation in a sense? That is to say, you and your practice representing a particular nation state. Within the context you were, of course, unpacking for us, right? Because you're participating as a representative within the context of the Biennale, right? Yet, at the same time, you are in some way trying to make transparent these relationships, right? Of the state to the history of the Giardini and the Biennale and so on and so forth. So, where do you what is your position in all of this in a sense? I mean, again, figuratively speaking.
I mean, you mean in relationship with the Biennale? Well, for me, it was to extend the space, because living in Venice and the loss of this public space, how it's been transformed, or the citizens in Venice, they lost this space and becomes part of the system of art. How I position in the system of art? Well, in and out. I think it's we are all implied that situation. I think it's like inside outsider, but with a position to be critical of things I wanted to be critical. And I think in this case, the context of the Biennale and the Giardini, it was a context that required this kind of discussion, because I think it was more and more, and I don't want to say this biennalization start to be a little bit too much. I think actually the Venice Biennale maybe is the one that keeps certain kind of character. But it becomes of devices of this situation of a spectacle, which pretty much I've been talking during the presentation. Like that, I think it was perceived very much as a expanded the idea of the Giardini and presented, actually the last Biennale, the 2007, the English representative, he used the same title, Giardini, with the film Steve McQueen. And I think it started to generate it, and I was invited to the Whitechapel in London to discuss, I think, the ideas of pavilions, and I think the pavilion as a device is interesting. Somebody like Dan Graham has been exploring that, and of course he has a long tradition. The Folies of Schumi in Paris, but it's very perverse, the situation in Venice. And I try to talk about this perversity. Yes.
Had anyone ever compiled, within the Venice Biennale Committee itself or foundation, had anyone ever compiled all the information that you compiled?
Well, the archive the archive of the Venice Biennale is a disaster. It's a disaster. A lot of people do research. The person who contributed to the catalog, Maria Martinez, he do a heavy research, a thesis. He needs to go by appointments. To order to go there, he could go 2 days, and he need to do 1/3 day as a voluntary work. And everything is in boxes.
So nothing had ever been made public in that way?
They suppose, they changed now the director. It's an immense history of 100 years of culture.
Were they upset by the way that you presented this history?
Well, no, actually they wanted in a certain way, if the archive was, to get the work. Part of that, but I say I don't give the work or don't sell the work if it's not to be in boxes. I mean, but it's a very interesting archive, because it's been political moments. 68, the 68 is where the Biennale was totally in question. It was a Biennale dedicated to Latin America, to East European, to many. It has an history. But the thing is, like many things, it's like the system is penetrating more and more. The interests of galleries and the commercial interests and money start to be more and more clear.
Sounds like a good book.
Well, I think it's for that the idea of thematic park. I got to talk about the last project. It's a project for the expo in Zaragoza. Aqua is water. I use in Latin because the city, it has a background as a city, Latin city, Roman. Aqua quo vadis, water where you going? And the whole expo was dedicated to water. And I decided to do a public work, but the people, we couldn't see it. Only you could see by Google Earth and by the plane. And I think the sentence, it was trying to ask to the water in a country where the water becomes very politicized. Regions that are fighting each other to get the water, and they become a very, very strong wars between. Like that, it was a work very connected to the context, but the idea to do as a work, I don't say with Google Earth, for Google Earth, it was like the possibility that is being seen in a global situation, but also locally. It was more than 100,000 postcards that people could circulate it. Like that, again, these kind of different devices of maybe working on the local and the global at the same time. And with this, I'm finished. And maybe if there's any, besides Joshua, questions.
That's why I moved back here, so that I...
No, but it's fine. We have a break or no? No. No, okay.
Sorry. Unless, no, Antonio, if you'd like one, please,
Hi.
we can do a break, seriously.
Huh?
So, that's up to you, if you'd like.
No. I think I have gas for a little bit more. More gasoline. Yes.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about the relationship between gaze, which a lot of your projects seem to focus on, reconfiguring the gaze of the viewer based on gaze, and the relationship between gaze and an action, right? And does perception directly equal an understanding of a situation or the behavioral codes that go into a situation into which you can then make an action? I mean, I'm thinking of just devil's advocate, the ways that perception can sometimes result in a bad action, like the actions of people and police during East Germany under the Cold War, or if you go to New York now in the subways, you've got those ads that say, if you see something, say something, right? Which kind of provokes a behavioral code of fear. So there's like a perception that equals a negative action. So I'm just wondering, again, if you could talk a little bit more about that relationship between gaze and action and how that plays out, you think?
Well, the sentence, I think, tried to answer this question. I mean, the perception requires involvement. That as much you know something, maybe you could be, obviously, as much we know something, we become more critical. That's clear. I mean, if I see this bottle for different position and that, I will say, well, what it works and doesn't work. Like that, in a way, the involvement, I think it's important the perception to understand the city in order to get involved. In relationship with these issues of fear, I always, normally I like to answer things with a specific things. I don't like it to, because if not, we become salesmen or politicians, I think my answer is I did a project in San Diego, Tijuana. It's called On Translation Fear, Miedo. And it was related to what you say. I mean, in certain moment after the September 11, and a lot in relationship with a political situation, fear starts to be used as a tool. In the border, it's clear that its issues of fear very complex. Like that, I worked for a couple of years in a project that, in a way, I like to give a copy to Joshua, and maybe one day if you wanted to see it. I prefer that the answer come with a project. I do a second version between working in Tijuana and San Diego that I feel, as a Spanish, I feel, wow, this is similar to what happened in Morocco and Spain, the border of Europe with Africa. And it's a second project that take me another 2 years, and it finished in 2007. Then the issues, they become more complex even, because he had elements of terrorism, elements of religion, representation of women. I mean, with all the Arab situation, it's much more complex. I mean, fears is still, they are there, but are other kind of fears. That, I don't know, when I have something that I feel preoccupied or interested, I think I try to originate the project. And more than to talk about. Like that, I don't know, I will say that most of the questions you give me, I try to canalize through things I've been, you know, that I have an opinion because I've been working on it. To try to less blah, blah, blah.
I'm wondering if you can speak about the media sites or series that happened in DC and Argentina, and the juxtaposition between filled space and empty space in regards to the censorship project that you did, the file room.
Yeah, well, the file room, again, is a response to a situation. I get involved. I get commissioned to a film in Spain, a program for television. And I asked to the Spanish television, asked me to do a project about the archive of the Spanish television. I remember in the 50s, the Spanish television, it was one channel, the Franco period. And it was propaganda, and it was totally an example, and I grown up with that. Like that, when I have the opportunity in '89, I proposed to do a project using the archives. When the archives, when I produced the work, 2 years for television is a lot. Television, they move in 3 months, 4 months, like that. In 2 years, they lost control. Changing producers, the system, and that. And this, it was interesting for me to move in freedom. The result, they never broadcast. And they never broadcast, they never give me a justification. Like that, I originated the file room. Because I feel like issues of censorship are more complex than just to say cut film, eliminated pages or burning pages, than I think with the idea we have of censorship. And it becomes much more subtle, and they have tools of for commercial reasons or non-commercial reasons. Books are not published, that works are not being seen. That the file room is a tool to try to bring in issues of discussion of censorship. And in a way, I think it's a work that is still open. And I don't talk about that because I feel like you need to choose some projects, you know. But I think everything I need to say about censorship is there. I include the first case I put, it was my case. And it was, at the moment, it opened is 400 cases. Now it's extended. It's part of the National Coalition Against Censorship. They are kind of administrate the project. And it's still a tool for, again, for me, it's a kind of artifact of activity, or maybe to be used. I mean, sometimes you move work that are trying to develop criticism, sometimes you try to find ways to create some alternatives. In the file room, it was more like trying to create an alternative about disappearance of public information in the culture, because all the project, the file room is about music, arts, digital culture, I mean, all the spectrum of the culture. That is very interesting, and every country has a different reactions to issues, you know. In some places they could be censored something, in other places not.
The theme of gentrification came up a few times in your different projects, and I was just wondering if your definition of gentrification changes in relation to the site that you're working within, or if it stays the same.
Of the translation?
Oh no, just
The
the
of-
meaning of the word gentrification, because that theme came up a few times in your
Transportation?
gentrification.
Gentrification, sorry.
It's okay.
Well, it's interesting that in certain countries, gentrification, it don't exist, the word. In Spain, it don't exist. And in French, it don't exist. It's an English word that if you see a dictionary in 1950s and you see a dictionary now, it's totally different kind of interpretation. I think it comes from the property of certain areas and gentry, and that now is adding all the speculation part. But in many countries start to use the translation from English, and I think in a way that because adding that speculative part. And I think it's a lot of the culture it has to have with that, because a clear example in France is the Pompidou Center, the museum. And I was talking about Barcelona. The museum in Barcelona is been using as examples of where culture it could be clean up, but also be part of a process of speculation. It's like the two sides of the word. That I think the speculation part in the original concept in English, you don't add the word speculation. I think with the time, the economy is adding to this part of the word itself. And I think in Paris, I mean, it's happening in many places. I think in the downtown Los Angeles with Mocha and many other places, there was maybe 20 years ago. You know, if we see downtown how it was 20 years ago. I live in 85 for a year here, and it's already 25 years. It changed a lot, and I think it's all processes that are happening in all. I mean, if we see Berlin, I think it's a part of the structures of the development of the city and the speculation in the hands of, I was mentioning before that is the disappearance of public space because corporate issues or surveillance, and I think the connection of the corporate is connected to the gentrification aspect.
In the photographs and the images of the sites of action and then in action now, like years later, the black and white, and those, it seems like we're looking at something that, like where something once happened, and of course, like there's things that happen so much or so many places, and then where there's no evidence of that now. And I wanted to know if there's anything really specific about the ones that you chose to include in the series, and then also the relationship between those, the fact that there was a lack of cultural memory or lack of a historization of those events, and then the relationship between that and the monument, because you started off talking about the monument, and it seems like the opposite, or the other option to there not being any trace of the historical event, the other option would be to have this monument, and that was also something that was inactive or not activating the history of the space or the site.
Well, I don't know if we answer properly, but the four alternatives I mentioned of the relation in interdisciplinary work between artists, architects, sociologists, planners, and that. And I think it could be a very good response to that, no? To see how a city could change and how everybody could project it, of course, involvement with the citizen, to not function in a way to, in a unidirectional way, but to the cities, they have time to think and to project it, you know, and to change, you know.
And the more the city evolves, the less.
Huh?
The more the city evolves, the less trace of history there will be.
Well, evolving needs to evolve. I think we couldn't put in a pessimistic situation, you know, when I can. Evolve because everything evolved, but how evolve? This is the point. And I think it's and how much is possible to do. I think it's a question of power and decision making. I don't think, for that, the possibility of interdisciplinary projects, I think it will, maybe could give some answers to that. I could see more and more than start to be projects in that way, you know? Some projects in Germany and some projects in England, some projects where it start to people thinking, well, not going to be a gesture here, a gesture there, but I think to try to do something in a much more involved way, you know.
Is it okay for me to ask another question? You go ahead.
Well, because I'm actually kind of picking up on a question that you brought up, Joshua, earlier. It seemed to me for the Biennale in Venezia that you presented research work, the archive of the Giardini as sort of the political, socio-economic conditions for artistic production. That you were sort of presenting research on conditions for artistic production. The Giardini has those conditions. And I'm wondering, I'm also trying to maybe make that leap that Josh was making earlier about to what extent were you interested in that project in informing those conditions? I mean, I'm sure
the space,
continues in that vein.
the space itself, the pavilion, it was a space of perception. I mean, it was not documentation only. I mean, the fact that normally when you go to a pavilion, it's a kind of celebration of a country where, you know, nationalistic issues represented by an author is always signs of identity of a country. It's for like, I transport to the idea of on translation. It was not talking about Spain. It was not talking about even Catalan, you know. It was talking about issues that is being interpreted in a larger way. Like that, the fact that the place it has a generic design, that it was very cold and very kind of this having a distance of idea of identity, and because become a generic space, try to associate to another kind of spaces, that are the spaces of transit and the spaces of, and to discuss an issue that it was the place itself. Like that, I think the proposition, it was pretty clear that it was addressed to public space, it was lost, how this public space is transformed. It was addressed about the society of a spectacle, that how everything become a thematic park or become a situation, and start to talk about the system of art, that in a way are like that. I think that it was several levels of the project. And research, it was important because it's a way to give certain kind of signs of evidence to the historification, you know. The fact that is, I was very brief discussing, this is maybe I could spend the 2 hours talking only about that project. That's maybe a mistake, you know. Maybe sometimes things like that is better. You take one project and you go to, and I mean, but I feel like sometimes people know the work. I think it's a way to have a spectrum where they come from. But I think it's, if you are interested in the subject, I think you look at the catalog, I think it's interesting, not only the information, but in the way how the association of things in terms of the use of the public space. Because lately I've been doing a lot of projects with transformation public, Alameda in Mexico, the Parque de la Alameda, that is being transformed. In Germany, in Bremen, is a project, it's called Public Space of Memory. It's how the German cities, and it's Bremen because it was the invitation come, but it could be Berlin or Hamburg. It's how the German cities after the 2 wars is being transformed, and how, what you do with the spaces. You recycle, you demolish, you transform, you build on top. And in Bremen, I found 70 spaces that it has incredible transformation. That in a way, they are basis in facts, but to create a metaphor or to try to interrogate it for these issues, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I found the project very interesting, and I remember seeing it and having discussions about, you know, the omissions, the list of sort of nation states that were represented, and those that were omitted in that kind of list, and that was.
But these omissions are not culturally, are political and economical.
Yes, but also artistic. Well, absolutely, but that there was also a discussion about sort of how that was an omission of sort of artistic production, a certain kind of artistic production, or a certain maybe even name you could say. But and so there was also in that project as well a sort of discussion about the Giardini as a sort of site for exhibition, art exhibition, and artistic production, therefore.
Well, I don't understand, never understand why Giardini is not using during the year. They have this construction, why they don't use? You know, it's only the spectacle activated every summer. But it could be, Venice is a city that very 65,000 people only, but 15 million people during the year. Like that is a flow of people. That space, it should be used in another way. It's closed. The space is closed. I mean, and before it was using for the people, you know. It's in a very interesting area, proletarian area in the city. People don't have access. Like that, one of the main reasons of the project is about dedicated to Venice to see losing the public space. You know? Italians, they was understanding, I mean, the Venetians, they understand that way because it's been a big debate.
Yeah, actually, my question was simply to, and this is maybe an opportunity to really talk about what we mean by, not on theoretical terms per se, but maybe more on pragmatic / conceptual terms, public space. And I know that as you're indicating, we need to talk about that on a case-by-case basis within particular cities, whether it's Venice or Barcelona, but I mean, maybe, and you also brought up Marc Auger, and of course Auger was one of the texts, I believe, that was represented in the catalog, right? I mean, he talks about place and non-place in relation to traditional conventional notions of public space or city space. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit upon this idea of the loss of public space in relation to notions or counter-notions of a reformulation of public space or tourist space, particularly in a city like Venice, in which there's a contestation, of course, of what public space means and whether, in fact, tourism evacuates a certain experience of public space, or actually transfigures it in certain ways so that it becomes another kind of public space, or a functionalized space as opposed to, so maybe, because obviously your work is interrogating these questions through questions, right, through inflections of particular city territories, and I'm wondering.
Well, can I answer with a case also? Germany, 2000, the World Cup, it was 2006, I think. World Cup, soccer, it was in Germany. Cities in Germany, they was competing to be the places where the games. They need to choose 8, and it was 18. The negotiation with an international organization, FIFA, Federation of Sport on that, made that it was totally transnational, and this organization, it could get from the cities in Germany any space they wanted. And they used spaces, for example, where I was working in Stuttgart, a big park, it was fences around, charged for people to go. You couldn't go with a bottle of water, you need to buy inside, and become totally a gentrified and corporate space. And this it was in 8 cities in Germany. And this it was in an entire summer. I think it's, in a way, the cities want to get money. They wanted to activate it through a spectacle and tourism, and the effect is I mean, parks in Germany, they are very well used. You could see, like in England, I think if we talk about public spaces, we talk about parks in certain parts of the world. In other could be beach, for example, in Brazil. Brazil, the public space is the beach. People, they don't go to swim. They go to talk and to meet and to, like that. I think it's a part of this process of the economic, than you know, this was a negotiation where all the spaces, it was fences. You couldn't go into the park, and your own park, there you go every day, because you need to pay, you have all the surveillance, all the system of checking if you have guns or you have everything. It was the stadium, and then a kind of media space where they projecting the soccer, expanded stadium, where they have music and they have that supposedly to be a ludic space, but it was totally controlled by an international organization that they don't have anything to do with Germany.
On the other hand, of course, there would be an argument from certain people, whether it's FIFA or some of the corporate sponsors, that there's a trade-off ultimately, right? That there may be citizens of Germany, this is a vast generalization, might be willing to live with the trade-off for that temporary period of time, right? I mean, there's this notion of the temporary autonomous zone, and then there's also in these situations of sort of international sport, you know, temporary or not so temporary controlled spaces.
Every time we saw Olympics, for example, London, it was fighting for Olympics. They get the last Olympics. It was against what? Madrid, Tokyo, I think, and they're really spending a lot of money to just get this kind of nomination, you know, because it's a part of, in a way, it's a distraction situation. Because as the project of the track would say, it created expectations, it created promise, but the reality is very little, very little. I don't know how much it was the result of the Los Angeles Olympics here. People, they remember at that time, they tell me, well, the traffic is better, you know, because a lot of everybody left. No?
I mean, to that case, I think...
Do you agree with I say with the Germany?
I see another side that happened which I luckily think is there, is that still there is inside the people the ability not only follow this commercial part. There was a huge, amazing, especially in Berlin, I don't know about Stuttgart, development that people were just putting TVs in their windows, and people were sitting or in cafes. There was a screen artificially made, and people were really blocking streets, sitting all over in the city. So that is for me always healthy to see that not all the people are in this kind of consumer mood, following all these very, very commercial offers.
You mean like it was certain opposition? Or opposition?
Yeah, like a different different feeling or a different different
protection
activity against this totally commercialized events where there were huge screenings also around the Brandenburger Gate, and just to see this, that people also have their own ways to create something, so to be active, and this is what I think is very, very important also for art in public space. How can you reactivate initiatives from people in public space, so that you like, I have the feeling people are more and more treated like consumers in public space and not anymore as citizens. So how can you make them become active and not just say, okay, I follow and I pay money and I go and watch.
Yeah, but I think in Berlin it was I think it was running for the Olympics in the 1992, and it was a strong opposition, and it was not candidate. That this opposition, I agree, it could be constructive to react to that. But I don't think this is more about a political issue. And I think it's how people organize and how people react.
But I also
Another thing, at that time in Germany, every day people appear. One day it was all orange because Holland was playing. Next day it was green because Brazil. You know, and who selling T-shirts, making business, you know? All that, I agree that people need to react, and I think artists will try to do something in that direction. But how the thing's going is not in the more optimistic way. I mean, how the economy functions is really like determine the things.
I was very interested in your screening truck project, because there for me it became very visible that people were really attracted, so there was a chance to get in direct contact with people that usually probably not go to galleries. And like we're talking a lot about public space, but can we talk a bit more about the audience that is not in like typical art spaces like the Venice Biennale or galleries? What relationship do we have to them as artists? Or I see you use methods like giving out postcards or giving out these newspapers to get somehow in contact and make the art more visible to them. Because, I mean, the project you did in Times Square, when was it? In
85.
85? there, you saw there was just this one screen. And I imagine at that time, your art project was quite visible. But
Yeah,
now,
but you know, it's 24 hours of advertising. And this was going, it's an intervention between advertising.
yeah, and this
Like that,
especially
it was,
this-
is tried to activate a response of the context where it was. And this is not advertisement. The no, it was flashing in and out. This is advertisement, this is not an advertisement, because I was assuming that for many people it become an advertisement.
So do you do some research or observation of how people in the streets are able to distinguish that this is art or advertisement?
I'll
or
let
is
to the
it
sociologist.
Antonio, can I get back to one? I need to,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt. I'm a little, I mean, I mean, this is not, it's more about the comments that were just made about, I mean, we have to, I mean, obviously you're very much aware of, particularly with the project in Venice, that there's been this history.
Well, one thing I wanted to say, I was not confusing, no, about, it was answering to Caroline, somebody was saying, and I say I'm in and out, is I'm working in the art context and I'm working in the no-art context. And I think it's very important because I try to see, it's every project, it has its own parameters and paradigms. Like that, the Venice Biennale I talked, but this is a kind of see for me, even it's for our world, that it was addressing very much issues, you know, that is concerned the city of Venice. Anyway, just to make a...
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, these are, I'm generally concerned when there's this statements that are made that somehow suggest, well, there's the public on one side and there's private interest on the other side, and likewise that there's, I mean, we know that the history of art in and of itself is a history of an interpenetration of private support and a growing opening up to public space through the museum and other kinds of institutions, and I think that interpenetration is alive and well in everything we see, whether it's in a museum context, whether it's on the street or elsewhere. I mean, these are firmly interpenetrated. Your practice has addressed these issues in many different ways and representing the complexities there. But I also think that I think we always need to be careful to sort of acknowledge the fact that that the public for art generally has grown exponentially, right, over the past 30 years. I mean, and it's grown exponentially in public sites, within museums predominantly, and there's been an effort not only in the United States but elsewhere, and that museums have functioned as sites of public memory for better and for worse, right? And obviously your practice has engaged that in different ways, and I think that the project in Venice on some level also engages a kind of even a museal, not directly but indirectly, a kind of museological, archaeological approach to that site in the broader city. But I am still concerned about what we mean by public space, and that obviously as an artist, you're not responsible for coming up with these definitions per se, right? You're using case studies, but as curators and theorists and critics and writers, we are always sort of coming to terms with, well, what do we mean by public space today? What do we mean by private space? What do we mean by the privatization of so-called public space? And I think ultimately that these things interpenetrate in ways that are quite ambiguous ultimately and not clear.
The first day of class in Boston, MIT, the first thing is, and I accept or not accept the person answering what is public. And the answers are 20 people, 20 different. But that the interpretation of public is very complex.
Yeah, that's all. That's so. I mean, I think that it is conceivable that people that encountered your projects, whether it's in Times Square, whether it's in the streets of Barcelona, or, you know, had a certain set of assumptions about art and culture, which you probably inflected, right, in a particular way. And that's where the kind of productive, critical experience happens, right, to a certain extent. I mean, it's not as if...
I think it's the idea of audience, you say, I think it's on public. I think individual, I think everybody, you know, perceive things in a way that maybe, what is the relationship of audience with this kind of works? I always see, seeing is not perceiving, you know. People say things, but not necessarily seeing that. And I don't want to say that is disinformation. But it's sometimes we have the willing to intervene in a situation that is very complex. It's very complex, and for that I think it's important to analyze project by project. It's not possible to talk in a generic way, because it needs to be said that is the context in that situation, and that is how it's possible to react to this or to react to that. To try to elaborate a standard discourse, I think is a mistake. It needs to be seen in each situation.
It's probably the only way you can actually be an interventionist, because if you were a guerrilla artist, you wouldn't even have to think about any of this. You would just do it. But yeah, I'm interested in how you actually navigate and negotiate some of these arrangements in terms of creating something. I mean, in the pavilion.
Well, negotiation is a word that is very important.
Yeah.
But you know, everything needs to be negotiated. You know?
Well, as we see these great.
But not negotiate in the sense of the administration part. Mm-hmm. The negotiation as a word that it has a complex meaning.
Well, the grant applications are very specific as to define how you will address your audience, define what benefit this will bring as a project to the community. I mean, these are the types of things that are demanded of people who make those kinds of negotiations, you know, as artists, but that are not guerrilla artists. They're just trying to do it.
But you know, you work in Germany in projects, urban screens called, no?
We're organizing a festival.
Yeah, but it's and is do it at the Los Angeles freeways. I mean, this is events they're trying to make in cities, trying to distribute information, activate it, you know, and I'm sure both of you could say more things than I could say myself, because you are dealing with what you're proposing, how is your feedback, and how is the situation through the years of these things. For example, one thing I found that is a pity is the inside is a place that you don't create a situation where people learning from that, from the projects, and I think some projects, they could be, you know, every new curator is starting from zero. One should be already understand that it's a community there, and you know, long conversation. Goodbye.
I mean, one real problem is that in the
Excuse me, there's somebody who's been trying to ask a question behind you. I need to let her.
Yeah, it just has to do more with what is always fascinating me about your work is the kind of
There?
collection of this meta discourse, or what I think of as a meta discourse that gets generated out of the work, whether it's through not just the experience of seeing the installation or seeing sort of experiencing your just discussion about the work or the presentation about the work and these models that you're giving us. And I'm curious what happens for you when your project, let's say File Room, gets then, it's a sort of standalone project, and it's in itself sets into kind of a constellation already, a complex network that Joshua sort of like mapped out for us, right? So then what happens then within this kind of production of meta discourse when the project then gets exhibited within something called like the art of participation at SF MoMA? I'm kind of curious, which is then itself creating another level of meta discourse about participatory works.
Well,
and I guess that's just two-part questions. That and more about the reception, not so much about the reception of your work versus your intentionality of it, and working in and out of the art world, and not what you were talking about, sort of in and out. Where do you find the sort of critical reception outside of the artwork for your work? That's what I'm curious about too.
well, I think I said before, I think is we do the work, the project take time to try to identify and to evolve a project to actually what the final result will be. That the whole entire period of a project, for me, is a process of where I internalize all these problems. After, it's not I don't care, but it comes to another hands. It's for that I say I'm not interested to do the sociology of the work. I think the sociology is implied in the origin of the work.
So I guess that's what my question is.
From some of the projects, they come from as a continuity of other projects. For that I was thinking then ways of learning of things, of learnings of to, then if I propose the idea of working long terms on that, it's because I think it's not a kind of, I'm not interested in working in intuition. First, because sometimes the first idea is not the best idea. Most of the time, I mean.
I guess maybe more pragmatic terms for me, what I meant about sort of the critical reception of the work is where the work, how the work gets discussed when it's in an art context is quite distinct, I would say. Like, let's say for the reception of the SF MoMA show, the art of participation, sort of more utopian rhetoric around the projects that were sort of in that context, versus, let's say, other projects that have more to do with public discourse in what you call the sort of the interventionist work outside of an art context. And I know, I guess what I'm just trying to get you to speak to a little bit more is just about, for you, when you do your research or when you're working within this sort of field of the project, what other sources outside of the art world discourse are you tuning into, let's say?
Well, I call to these spaces to try to differentiate it with public spaces, protected spaces. The galleries, the museums, places like here. It's places where the discussion come up from a specialized situation or information. I think we need to work in both. I mean, we need to be aware of the context where we're working, but not in an inclusive way. Not in an exclusive way, in an inclusive way. Because some of the things, these places, they function as a laboratory, I suppose that people are studying and they are creating prototypes. I created discussion like that. We need to move in the protected and public spaces, and one thing nourishes the other. I think it's before you say about guerrilla, or it could be activism and that, I think these words existing for many, many years. But the thing is what is activism today, tomorrow is not anymore. Like that, it's also a process of in a way, negotiation, but also assimilation of things. I think it's important is, again, I insist that every time it needs to be considering the place and the project in a way with his own conditions and with his own characteristics, and it's not possible to generalize things. I mean, a project you do, I was very insisting in the beginning that the reaction I have, like Washington, Budapest, and Argentina, even the subject and the dispositive, it was similar. It was 3 types of city that in a period of 30 years appear. Meantime, I was maybe in many other cities, but it's how they react. You react to a situation. I think it needs to be very, very, very specific. I think my gasoline is finished. No, but sorry.
How do you feel about the way in which your work has been categorized by critics, art historians? Do you feel that the language...
I feel very well.
the language that has been used or ascribed to your practice, I mean...
You know, I have a really problem of identify myself to a medium. I totally reject it, you know. In the 70s, 80s, I work a lot of video, then immediately it's video artist, or then it becomes later net artist because you work on that. This, I think, is a terrible category of situation. I think it's part of the critics to organize information. I think it's always, I think it's theories and tendencies, and yes, I think it's that. But in one way, this, and another way is also, you know, I don't feel identified with situations. It's for that defined with protected space, public spaces. I think it's, I work with projects, and every situation, it could be in the art world or not art world, I think it needs to be considered because I think it's part of its own proposition, you know. I think the term project comes from architecture and cinema, I think, for me. I mean, you part with a script for a film, and it takes time to develop to that, till orchestrating the situation. In reaction to certain kind of a studio practice that maybe are working, you know, this kind of the idea of to intuitive practice, I think is not involved so much research on that, but this is parti pris, it's a decision. I don't think it's, one thing is better than another, it's only in the way how you are appropriate or you are identified with a practice. So. But I think a hybrid situation. I did one show in '88, I call hybrids, and everybody say, how you call hybrids your work? Because at that time, '88, hybrid, it looked like a very pejorative term. Now, hybrid is, in '88, hybrid, it was really not pure, contaminated, horrible. Okay. Well, thank you.